This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 469 for Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we're into. Joining me this week, Stephen ESC is back. When he is online, you can find him at Stephen ESC on Twitter and every so often on Twitch. That's Stephen with a PH if you're interested. Hello, sir, and welcome back to the show.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
As always, I don't remember how long we've been doing this, but it's been a couple of years, I think.
I think we started, it was January 2021, 2020, I believe.
Almost 4 years, really?
No, then it would be 2021. I'm getting my math wrong. Yes, I was thinking 2023, but January of next year will be 3 years. As a regular, at least anyway. I've been doing it for a bit longer than that, just on and off.
Right, yeah. I think there was some popping in and popping out, and certainly coming by for things like the holiday episode and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, there's math and then there's COVID math, right? And
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan and Murphy and I have the same conversation, almost like an in-joke now whenever he's on the show. And I basically look up before the show the last time that he was on, because ultimately he says, like, I don't remember when that was on. And I can be like, well, I can tell you. It's been this episode and this number and this many days and all that kind of stuff. Usually if there's been any gaming news, that's usually the last time that I've had Ryan on the show.
Right.
But in the interim, over the summer, what have you been up to?
I mean, as we discussed last time, work's been busier than usual, but I took a little bit of time off the last a couple weeks ago, just leading up to our elder son going away to college. So he's staying in residence. So the first time he's been away from home for this long, because he's been homeschooled. So he's actually, he's been basically here all the time since he was like 4 or 5 years old. So this is, it was a huge deal for our family, and it continues to be. But so we had a couple busy weeks leading up to it, and the moving day itself was pretty busy. But we got everything in, got it all. We didn't get anything really set up. It was more of a let's get everything there, get it in, and shoved off to the side as neatly as possible for him to put away himself over the next couple of days or whatever. But man, it was we knew it was going to be an emotional sort of parting, but it was harder than we thought it was going to be. Especially the first couple of FaceTimes was just rough, because I mean he shared a room with his brother ever since his younger brother was born. So he had been, and he always, they always said no offense to his younger brother, but was looking forward to having a room of his own,
as a young man would,
Yeah, but he didn't realize how alone that would be. Not even necessarily just how alone he would feel missing his brother and family, but like in a room with a closed door and strangers around, just like he didn't realize how isolated or alone he would feel right away. And so it was tough to see him like that in the first couple of FaceTimes. But basically as every day went by, he got more and more comfortable. Got to see the campus, got to see his classrooms. So this is his first time in a classroom setting even. So he's excited for that. I'm assuming he kind of downplays everything, so it's hard to tell exactly how he's feeling. He just plays it cool a little bit. So it's hard to know whether he was really anxious about it or if he was just a bit nervous about it. But yeah, he seems to be enjoying it. Every time we talk to him, he's opened up a little bit more, and he seems more at ease. And now instead of his room feeling like it's this box that he's alone in, it's already become like his little refuge that he goes back and hangs out in and decompresses and relaxes. So it's I tell you, I'm unbelievably grateful for all the tech that allows us to stay connected and have a chat with him every night. So it's been good.
I was about to say, FaceTime would have been really interesting when I went to school. My first time away from home, in that light was in 97. That's when I went to school. So like there wasn't even cell phones. Like
Yeah.
I think there was a hall phone in every floor in the dorm that I was in at Mount A had a hall phone, I think. But you could also just pay the New Brunswick, telecom and get a phone in your room. And my roommate had a girlfriend in Moncton, which is about a 45-minute drive away from school. So he was on the phone all the time with her. So he got his own phone. And he just said, you're welcome to use it whenever you want. I don't remember whether we split the cost of it. I mean, back then it would have been like, $10 a month a piece or something silly. Like it was it's a landline. Kids, it had a cord and it was attached to the wall. Like it wasn't even a cordless phone. He might have maybe brought one back later so he could lie in bed and talk to Crystal. I remember because he used to talk to her constantly. So I remember exactly those details. But for me, like having a roommate right away meant there was at least someone to talk to. We got along fine. I wouldn't say we were best friends, but like having someone that was tolerable that you could at least bounce like, hey, this is all new. How did you register for this class? Or like, where did you find that? And which computer lab are you going to? Like all that kind of stuff. You had someone to kind of bounce it off of. And I don't know whether, where your son is going is as organized as Mount Allison was when I was there, but we had like frosh groups and all kinds of orientation stuff where you get to know people pretty well. And while I wasn't homeschooled, I did feel like I came out of my shell, at Mount A. And I think a lot of it was just like, those are the first times I ever went to a cafe on my own to draw. Didn't go with anybody, just sat there by myself with a coffee and drew, maybe while my laundry was being done or something like that. This was later on after I moved off campus. But like those 4 years were more formative, I would say, than anything I did in high school. And I don't know how it would equate to homeschooling. I'm sure you could probably, speak to this, but like for me, high school, I was just on rails. Like you were still told where to go, what to do, what classes to take, with the exception of a couple, you that you could choose. You basically had to take all the normal stuff, math, science, English, all that stuff. And you just took the class and once you took the class, it happened when it happened. Like, whereas like at Mount A, like I think there were probably like a couple different intro courses to science or whatever that you could take. And if you didn't like the time of day that it was happening this semester, you could always take it next semester when it wasn't first thing on a Monday morning or something like that, So you had a lot more choice to kind of sculpt your day and live your life a little bit better. And so I don't know how on rails homeschooling feels. I mean, I'm assuming by the time your boys are in high school, they're a little bit more, self-sufficient and like they don't have to like sit there from like 8 to 3 every day like someone that would go to high school would, right?
Yeah, I mean their schedule and when they were homeschooled was fairly loose. Like they had like a week schedule of lessons, and they had to get stuff done by the end of each day, basically. So if they woke up and they decided they wanted to play video games for 2 hours, and then they had to just sit down and get all of the stuff done in a short period of time because they quote unquote wasted their morning away, then they could do that if they wanted to, or they could kind of wake up and basically eat their breakfast, start their lessons. And sometimes if they were just really focused, they were done by noon and they had the rest of the day. And we basically allowed them to, we worked with them to pick courses that they liked. I mean, they're just from a curriculum perspective, the government of Nova Scotia expected you to have like certain courses taken care of. So like on their transcript, typically you would have, you have to have your like a high school history, and you have to have some sciences and some maths and things like that. So my wife, who was in charge of all the homeschooling, and hats off to her because she did that from primary all the way through the end of high school for our elder child. Basically made sure that they hit all of the things that they needed, and then otherwise just let them pick different courses and things that would be along the lines of what they were interested in. So this is going to be a much more focused and structured school experience than he's ever had before. So
I don't remember whether it was this show or whether it was the Spawn Chunks, but Tadpole Milk was on, and he was talking about like, getting good at Minecraft. And I was talking about the time in, and how after a certain amount of time, there's just a lot of stuff that starts to come naturally. And one of my things that I really liked about going to Mount A and going to school was now all the courses that I took, granted it was a heavy course load at Mount A, They were all focused on art, which was all things I was very interested in. So it became a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier to go to school. Like I didn't really, I mean, over time, sure, you start to dislike art history because it's kind of a long, boring 90 minutes of slides and someone talking about dead people that made art, like it's, unless you're really into history, like it can be a little bit of a slog. But overall, like you're still like, I am still learning about art. I'm still making art. I'm still doing all these things daily, as opposed to sitting through French class where there's some disruptive student in the back being a dick, like just all that kind of stuff I did not have to deal with. And I found that I really hit my stride and found that it was more enjoyable rather than having to hit like a certain, metric. So like when you have a choice, like all that kind of stuff, well, I mean, it's like anything else. Like you and I both enjoy the line of work that we're in. It makes going to work every day a lot easier, despite the fact that you can get busy and it's still valid that you feel overwhelmed or stressed about deadlines or whatever. Like that's all still part of life, but it's a lot easier to take that shit when you still like what you do at the end of the day, like, cause I have that thing where like, I try not to complain about what I'm doing and where I am because I'm trying to improve it. And I get, as we do on this show, self-critical about the little things about what's not going right when broadly things are going okay. And my friend Britt will be quick to remind me, like, look, you're allowed to complain. Like it's still a job. Like, you're still doing it for money. That means there's stress involved. There's deadlines for things that you have to get stuff done. You have to be productive. You can't just slough off all the time. But like, try not to beat yourself up for taking a half day to play video games. Like it's not the end of the world, and that kind of stuff. And it's hard, as someone that did a lot of freelance and I don't like to use the word starving artist, but it's the easiest way to kind of communicate because I was never starving. But very tight budget, very heavy workload at an early age, starting off in my career. And it's hard to beat that mentality out of you when you are more experienced, have more lucrative things happening, and have free time. It is weird. It's just weird when you've got, when you've gone for so long without free time. It's like when you first finish school and you get into the workforce and you realize that the workforce gives you no homework. At 5 o'clock, you're done. When you have one of those regular 9 to 5 jobs. And in animation, it was the same thing. I'd get home at 6 o'clock and I'd be just like, what do I do now? I worked all day. It's fine. But I was like, what do I do now? I don't have any homework. So it's hard to get used to sometimes. Well, speaking of playing video games in the daytime when I'm supposed to be working, even though playing video games is now part of my job, like, I mean, you see where I get confused. I actually started to play Starfield, which was a launch day for September 6th for me. I was originally going to be playing it on the 5th, but I actually ended up not sleeping well the night before. And I knew that I could not do a 9 p.m. to midnight stream launching a new game and be at all energetic. So I thought, you know what, it's just going to be better to be an adult about this and sleep and launch it the next day. I'm glad I did, because the first impressions of the game have been really mixed. There's mixed reviews. There's a lot of people singing its praises. There's a lot of people that are playing hundreds of hours in the game. I've read reviews and it's really hard to find a balance, because there's people that are basically like zero reviewing it because they just don't think the game is delivering what it promised, but they're also reading between the lines and thinking that it was overpromising when it wasn't. And for me, I mean, for people that aren't familiar, Starfield it's a space sci-fi RPG set in the 2300s. So like 2330, I think, is the date, when you start the game. And basically humans have popularized Alpha Centauri, or populated Alpha Centauri. There's a bunch of different colonies. Earth is a wasteland and you're out in space. You very quickly get thrown into the story and you join a team of explorers called Constellation. They're not that dissimilar to a very tiny federation. They're basically about exploring space, science discovery, and helping people along the way, essentially. And you can make decisions through dialogue trees as to who you befriend, what missions you want to take, and if you want to help little side characters, or if you want to just skip straight ahead and go straight down the main mission path, that kind of stuff. Very similar to Skyrim, if you've ever seen it played, because Bethesda is the same developer. This is the first new IP from Bethesda in a long time, like 10 plus years, I think. And Starfield has been in development for 7. And then, of course, just released here this month. And that's a significant number, because the lack of polish, like the lack of finish on a game that's been in development for 7 years is astounding. And
Really?
yeah, Bethesda is infamous for having some bugs, like a little bit of jank in their game, little things that don't necessarily work the way that they were intended. I've not encountered any game-breaking bugs. There have been some crashes that are very specific to certain hardware. There has been performance issues on the Xbox and on some PCs with non-AMD hardware. So people that have NVIDIA cards and Intel processors have not been having the best performance. It still works. It's just not as shiny as they advertised. And there have been a few, but I have not encountered them yet. Mission bugs where like you need to complete this dialogue tree to finish this mission and the dialogue tree just doesn't exist, or your next rendezvous point just isn't given to you in the game. And so people are just like, this mission is bugged out. And unless it's like if it's a side mission, it doesn't matter as much. It still sucks, but it's not like it's keeping you from finishing the game. And the game is supposed to be infinite in that once you finish the main story, they've written something into it, and I don't know what it is because I've been avoiding spoilers, where you can then continue to play the game, continue to level up, explore new things. There are 1,000 planets in this RPG, some of which are completely procedurally generated. Some of them are man-made, in Bethesda Studios, sculpted to have a very specific experience in certain areas. And then once you go outside those areas, they're back to being procedurally generated because there's it's just a bunch of rocks, or something like that. Where the cities and stuff like that, they're not procedural. They're actually, sculpted, just like you'd see in a lot of other video games. So I've been enjoying the story so far. Like the positives are, despite a quick kind of drop you in and away you go, very similar to any Zelda game that you might have played or seen played, where it's like, the road is dangerous. Here, take this sword. And you're basically like, off to the adventure, and away you go. Yep. It's the same idea. You meet this guy, Barrett. He's like, hey, you've had the same vision I have. Here's the keys to my ship. You should go join Constellation. Bye now. And you're just like, what? He just gave...
That's very generous of you, stranger.
You've met the guy for 5 minutes. He's like, you should be the captain. You're on the thing. The robot is calling you captain within 30 seconds. And like, it's your ship for all intents and purposes. Like you can mod it. You can add things to it. You can store all your stuff in it. The guy just kind of gives you his spaceship. I haven't seen him since. There is a mission to go back and talk to him at some point, I'm sure. But like, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, fine, game. Like that's tutorial over. I get it. But that's where, the things that are a bit buggy start to raise their heads. Like as a UI and as a graphic designer, you would have a field day picking apart the things that they are lacking in this thing. Like the inconsistency of like, buttons that you press to enter interfaces, the lack of visual feedback or audio feedback that you've done something, the sheer volume of menus and different buttons you have to press to go inside and outside of menus, and they all look the same with like the smallest little thing in the background indicating that you're in an inventory in a shop, not like it's really, really frustrating in that way. And it really takes the momentum out of it because the combat in the game is a first person shooter. So like you get machine guns and you can modify them and then you can go into battles and it's all very action paced. And then you get back to your ship and you're in the menus for 15 minutes, like dumping your inventory and selling stuff and where did I put that? And like, is that this gun or that gun? And they all look the exact same. They're the same color. Maybe one of them has like a slightly different color handle, but like it's very difficult to sort all that kind of stuff out, especially when you compare it to other games that do that very well. Like Borderlands, you might pick up a couple of different guns, but like one is bright pink and one is bright blue. Like you can immediately remember, I like the blue one, I'm going to sell the pink one, like that kind of stuff. And so it's a little bit difficult in that way. And then the other stuff that's buggy that is the stuff that takes me out of it. And that's like 2 NPCs talking to you at the same time. Like it is day one. Is this your first video game mistake? Like it is really, really surprising the level of stuff like that's happening in the game. You're walking and then you turn to talk to your robot companion and he doesn't have a walk cycle. He's just sliding beside you. And you're like, what? Okay, sure. That's a little buggy. It doesn't break the game, but it's just like, it pulls you out of whatever you're doing. And you're like, oh, right, I'm playing a video game. And the thing that drives me nuts about the characters talking at once is like, these are things that really should be second nature. Like if you interact with an NPC and you're going to talk to that NPC, that should be the only audio you're hearing. I should not be hearing either people talking to me or people talking to one another for that like kind of ambient environment noise. If I'm in talking to an NPC, moving the plot forward and they're saying important stuff, I shouldn't have to then deal with whatever's being said next to me. Because whatever's being said next to me, it's a written, recorded line that's not worthless. It'd be akin to you asking your wife, how was your day? And then one of your boys coming in and talking about what they're making for dinner, both of which are interesting to you and you want to know, but they're both being said at the same time, right? Like it's infuriating. And there's all kinds of stuff like that. The conversations between my companions, there's 2 women in the game that had a conversation about not fitting in with Constellation. One woman was from a different faction and she thought, she wasn't sure if people in Constellation liked her. I kid you not, Stephen, they had that conversation every minute. Every 60 to 90 seconds, they had the exact same conversation as I was going through a firefight with them. So they'd be bang, 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 help me out with what I'm doing as we're trying to retrieve this artifact. And then the moment the gunfire is over, they go back to talking about the exact same thing with the exact same dialogue. And it's like, did anybody at Bethesda bother to turn the game on and try it before they sent it out? It's surprising to me. Now, I'm not a Bethesda apologist. I'm not a Bethesda fan. Skyrim was okay. I didn't play very much of it. I was late to it and it was kind of old by the time I got to it, so it didn't really grab me. There's a lot of people that love that stuff. But I think that Bethesda relies far too heavily in an arrogant way that the people out there, they've just played enough Bethesda games that they know how this is going to go. And that is really arrogant and poor game design, if you ask me.
It's just kind of mind-boggling that they would release something with that level of unfinished. Like you're just listing all of these things off, and I'm just shaking my head here. I just can't. I mean, I guess in today's day and age, you've got the benefit of, I shouldn't say benefit, but if it's a downloadable game, then they could, you can get patches and patches and patches. Whereas could you imagine if this was the kind of thing that was this buggy in a cartridge or something like back in the day?
Oh, exactly. Right. Or bring it forward into any other kind of profession. You design a website for me.
Oh my goodness.
And you've missed that 2 of the links don't work. There's a couple of spelling mistakes and 2 of the images don't load. And you're like, all done. Thanks. Pay me now. I'd be like, no, you need to finish your job. And that
I did. I met the deadline.
Exactly. Right. Well. And this is what I'm saying is that I'm really glad that I did not pay $90 Canadian for the basic version of this game. It's included in Game Pass. Now, do I pay for Game Pass monthly? Yeah, it's about $20 Canadian after taxes, but I get to play Forza and Halo and a bunch of other stuff that I enjoy. And this happens to be included because Microsoft owns Bethesda now. And I'm glad it does because I don't think, had this not been included in Game Pass, I would not have been playing day one. There's a number of people in our community that are seeing all that's going on, have watched me play the first 6 to 8 hours on stream and decided I'm going to wait until they patch some of these bugs before I play it, or I need to wait for the patch, the technical stuff so my system can handle it if I want to play on PC. But there's the basic stuff that's missing. There's no brightness slider. There's no adjusting for HDR. I'm not sure if you've played a game that has any kind of HDR in it, but they often give you adjust the brightness of this game until this little gray square is barely visible. And basically it just kind of adjusts the game to the black levels on your TV so that when you're going through a shadowy area, it's dark and spooky, but you can still see where you're going. And Starfield is the opposite. It's so washed out on Xbox Series X, which is the Microsoft system it's exclusive to, which is the company that owns Bethesda, and there's no settings to adjust the HDR. It's not set up correctly. So when you go into this dark, dank area of a city called the Well, which is basically the poor area, it's all air vents and pipes, and it looks like you're in the kind of the bowels of a city kind of idea. And it's so over lit, it's so washed out. There's no contrast, there's no dark corners, everything is just kind of muddy sepia, and you're just, I can't adjust it, I can't fix it because the game says no, we did it right. No, you didn't. If you're gonna have control over this stuff, do it right. And having,
That's
yeah,
frustrating.
like you don't even have an FOV slider. Minecraft has an FOV slider. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff just seems like a lot of oversights. But now, and those to me are, again, they're not game breaking, but they're certainly review sliding. Like I don't look at this and say 10 out of 10, fantastic game. There are a lot of reviews out there that say 10 out of 10. I don't know why. I have no idea how you could look at this and say, yeah, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it, which is completely, incorrect. The best review I've seen was a YouTube video that was entitled Deeply Flawed, and Yet I Love It. And I think that that's a really good way.
At least it's honest.
Yeah, it's a good way to sum up how I feel, to keep this short. And that is, it is deeply flawed. I will always be noticing these problems. There's probably going to be more of them. I will rant about them on my streams and get a little bit frustrated with them. But ultimately, I'm still thinking about the game when I'm not playing. The story is, the story is interesting. The world is unique. It's not a dystopian future. It's not zombies. It's a hopeful game. I think that's the other thing that I like about it is that there are factions, there are pirates, there are bad people, but you are part of the same kind of hope that you get from Star Trek. Like you're out there to do good. You're discovering things. You're looking at the future of humanity and you're trying to move things forward. There's good people around you. That kind of stuff. I mean, there's some NPCs are kind of dickish, but they're not on your team. They're usually people that you have to deal with, And there's been fun moments that have been scripted. Like I had to break up a bank robbery on I think it's called Aquila City. It's essentially like a Western town. So like there's a marshal. It feels like the Old West. Everybody's got shotguns and like revolvers and stuff. Space revolvers, but still revolvers. And you get on the intercom to talk to this guy, and I shouldn't say looks because you never get to see him. He sounds like he's got like two stones to rub together between his ears. And so you have this conversation where you're trying to convince him to like de-escalate the situation, release the hostages and come out. And the whole dialogue tree is really funny because of course the way that he's acted and the way that he talks is so stereotypical. And it's something that you would see of like a Justified TV show or, something, a crime drama. And so those little bits, like those little character moments, the story overall, the idea of how big this world is in that if I don't want to do the main mission, I can go off and do something else. I think that's the appeal. I'm currently still kind of on those story rails and that I kind of want to see where it goes. So I will continue to keep playing, but I'm trying to to forgive myself for being a little negative about it when I'm streaming, because like you as a designer and as an artist, I can't unsee all of the Bethesda jank that is just so surprising in a game that you'd think would be more finished.
Like you said, if you had to pay $90 for the game, or if you had been noticing all of this stuff after spending $90 on the game, I would imagine it would just be like next level frustrated and livid.
It would be really frustrating. I don't know that I've ever bought a game like that day one. I think the only time that I have was if it was like a sequel. So like Borderlands 3. I played 1 and I played 2. Granted, I didn't finish 2, but it's not like I didn't like it. I just ended up getting too busy and I didn't have the time. But because it was Borderlands 3, I 100% trusted the developer. I know what I'm getting into. I know what I'm expecting. It's going to be this and hopefully a bit better, Same thing with the Batman Arkham games. Those were always good. Once I played 2 of them, I was like, I'm just going to play them. Now, they lost me with Arkham Asylum? No, Arkham City? Arkham Knight. Whatever one of the more recent ones was, it wasn't very good. And I tried it. It was part of Game Pass. I had access to it. I didn't even have to pay for it. And I still didn't finish it because I did not like it. There was missions that weren't very fun. But those games, those Arkham games, the first 2 or 3 or 4, I think even, I was in, after playing the first 2, I was like, I don't care what they sell. I'm buying it because I know it'll be at least good until they lost me. But that kind of stuff has always been sequels. For video games, I usually wait for either reviews, but online these days, it's so hard to trust people because you get review bombs. You get people that just want the attention for giving something that's good a bad review. I often go to people like, our friend Ryan Murphy or other podcasts, Garrett Weinzierl and Kyle Ferguson, Grinding Gears, I think is the name of their show. And like, they are friends of mine and I trust their opinions of stuff because, they'll tell you like it is. They're like, yeah, it's not perfect, but I'm still liking it. It's still fun. Like I'm still having a good time. It's like when you can turn off that thing that suspension of disbelief when you're watching a show that's not quite hitting for you. It's like, well, if I can just backseat myself and be like, I just have to, this is meant to be silly. I'm going to let it be silly and maybe I'll have a better time, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Speaking of TV shows and the stuff that we have been watching, the main discussion this week is going to be about Star Wars Ahsoka, including an email from a listener. So that's going to be a lot of fun to dig into.
Mm.
It will be full of spoilers, and there will be no way to talk about this without spoilers. So I'm giving you a warning that we're going to get into it this week. But before we get into Ahsoka, you actually have gone to see a film that I have been wanting to see for quite some time.
Actually, you and I were trying to make it happen. Unfortunately, schedules just didn't work out, but before my son went off to college, we had a chance to go see the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, which was pretty great. I'd say overall, really enjoyable movie, but I think there's just something about it that just didn't. There's nothing about it that left me blown away, if that makes sense.
So if we're running it up against something like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse,
yeah, thoroughly enjoyable and blew me away. Yeah.
So this is coming short of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's, I guess, partially my own fault. I didn't pay attention at the fact that it's a PG movie. And so, there's only so dark it can get. There's only, the stakes can only get so high. So that it never really felt like there's anything really ever that threatening going on or any point where I go, oh my goodness, I don't know how they're going to get through this. But we my son and I, we still really liked it. It's visually stunning. Just ever since, speaking of Spider-Verse, ever since that came out, just sort of the roughness, almost like hand-drawn aspect of these 3D animations these days. It doesn't have the same look, but it took 3D animation and made it look a little bit claymation, colored pencil and pastels in different areas. So it had a very, very cool, stunning look to it. Enjoyed that. And it had great voice acting, especially from the Turtles. I thought the 4 kids who played the Turtles did a really great job. Micah Abbey as Donatello, Shannon Brown Jr. as Michelangelo, Nicholas Cantu as Leonardo, and Brady Noon as Raphael. They were all really fun, really energetic. I think they nailed their roles really well. There's a couple of really funny parts in it, just that I think lent themselves well to having like really young actors, or I shouldn't say really young. They weren't like 5 or anything like that, but felt like they were early to mid-teens, where some of their voices were still a little bit higher, and it made some of the parts more comical. So really enjoyed that. Thought overall like it was had really fun and appropriate music to what was going on throughout the entire thing, which is again, nothing stood out as like, oh, that was just amazing, but it seemed to suit it as we went along. So it was good. There was actually there was one fight sequence that I thought they really, really nailed. And I guess now that I'm looking back at it, it didn't blow my mind, but that would be probably my favorite part in the entire thing, because it's sort of when the Turtles are finding their groove, fighting the bad guys. I guess I should say, bit of a spoiler alert, but essentially it's almost like they intentionally found 4 different mob bosses that they wanted to go after. So there are 4 Turtles, 4 mob bosses, and so basically the fight sequence started with all of them kind of bursting into the room of one of the mobsters, and like Michelangelo would have been in the front of one of them, and then it shows them bursting into another room, and Raphael would have been in front of the other one, and they did that 2 more times, and then the fight starts with whoever was in the front of that room leading the fight sequence, and the camera was following them from the side, and then it would cut to them being in the other mobster spot, and so it was almost like, just for example, say one of them was throwing an uppercut, and just before it landed, then it would switch to the other turtle landing that uppercut on a different mobster, and it was like the same fight, but cut between 4 different mob boss sequences. And and because it was 3D animated, it was seamless. Like, they actually did a really solid job of that. Funny at times, some fun Easter eggs for those who enjoy the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoons or movies back from when I was younger, or yeah, it was good. Overall, it felt, I guess my only complaint, and that's just because, like I said, I didn't do my homework, was that it felt like it was a very, very safe and geared towards younger kids.
Well, here's something that you might find interesting, because I didn't know this. I had to look it up, but Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is also PG.
Really?
Yeah. So maybe it was a combination of the rating and the writing in TMNT that just kind of pushed it more young. aimed it at a younger audience.
Yeah.
It could also be just strategic in that they'd want the younger kids to go see it so that they can make 3 more and have those kids go when they're, 14, 16, 18, like
True.
that kind of stuff. I have the same complaint about stuff like Clone Wars, the cartoons, because the first 2 or 3 seasons are really kiddie. They're very Saturday morning cartoon. Then when you get into seasons like 4, 5, 6, it's like, sit down as an adult. I am into this, because they stop being episodic. There's more, season long arcs, like that kind of stuff. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of animation that still does that, despite the fact that television Saturday morning as it was doesn't really exist in the same way. In that, like, if you're doing something as a Netflix series, like if you're gonna do like a series that you feel that the adults that used to watch Clone Wars or used to watch Avatar: The Last Airbender are really going to get into, don't start it off kiddie. Aim it at the 20-year-olds and go from there. Because I think you'd have a much better way, because they're the ones paying for Netflix, like they're the ones that are out, there watching it on their own in their dorm rooms and stuff like that. Like if you want a cult classic in animation, like aim it at the college kids. We used to watch, this was before streaming, but we used to watch undergrads. One of the social things we used to do in my college dorm was everybody would get together on Thursday nights and watch like Teletoon at night, or I can't remember what they called it, but it was like Adult Swim. And so there'd be like Duckman and the Oblongs, and the Undergrads was one of my favorites. That was actually Canadian made too. And like just really funny stuff. The cartoons, like that was back before Family Guy existed. South Park, I think, debuted my first year of university. So like none of that really edgy adult stuff was close. Simpsons were out, but like that was still pretty safe because it was on primetime, like network TV, right? But this stuff was really kind of pushing limits, and we had a really good time with it. I like the look of Mutant Mayhem. I think that, I would have liked to go see it in theaters, but you and I, like, they had like one screening a day, and it was like 3D small theater in the evening. And I was like, if I had been in like a regular screening, I totally would have gone, but the 3D stuff I can't do. I've got glasses that I have to wear under glasses, and I can't, not my favorite experience.
And it was awkward. It's I'm like you. It's always awkward when you're wearing the 3D glasses over the other ones. But it was the only, the non 3D time slots were during the day. There's like one early afternoon and one late afternoon, and then so basically any time slot that a grown up would like to go watch it with their, either on their own or with their kids, it's got to be the 3D version, at least locally. Yeah. So those. Yeah, a little bit frustrating, but I do like what I've seen in the trailer, the way that they do the animations on 2s or 3s, sometimes even a held pose. Like that's what makes it look kind of stop motion like. And they also do like cell shading, where they take the 3D and they kind of give it like an outline, so it kind of has a flat look. And I love the stylized stuff. And you even mentioned like pastels and like colored pencil looks. Like that's something I really liked about some of the different things that they've been doing with the, not necessarily the Clone Wars, but some of the other Star Wars animated stuff. I think Bad Batch is like that, where you can actually see like the hand painted textures on the characters, despite the fact that they're CG and they're not cell shaded, but they have like a textured look. They almost look like puppets in a way, and they almost look like they have felt texture on them, which I think is really cool. And it adds to like a bit of a distance with like the suspension of disbelief. It's something that I really wish that Starfield was like, actually, is that they try to be super realistic with Bethesda games. Like they've always been like that. I played a little bit of Fallout. I've played a bit of Skyrim. They try to make it look as realistic as possible. The problem with that is that it's very often boring from an art direction standpoint. You know what medieval times looked like realistically? Gray and brown. Right, like it is gray and brown, dark, wet, and that's it. And then Starfield, it's got a lot of gray and brown. Now, obviously, I've mentioned that there was some, lighting and contrasting problems, and the way that it's being rendered is not great. But even then, like even when you're in a major city, like everybody's got realistic hair and realistic features, and but for that size of video game with that many characters walking around, either Bethesda just didn't do it right, or we're just not there yet. It very much looks like I'm watching a very poorly done character. The hair on some of these characters looks awful. Like, you're talking to a video game puppet. They stare at you. They barely blink. Like it's really weirdly weird. And the uncanny valley is there.
But when you don't do that, when you do it like World of Warcraft, or I played Palia for a little bit, and like those are stylized characters. So they're cartoony. They've got oversized heads. There's like a cat alien that's very animated. It looks like a Disney cartoon. And that kind of stuff you can get away with a lot more. And so you don't have to have that suspension of disbelief. And I like that they do that now with like the animation, where they're not trying to make it look like super Disney or super Pixar. With Star Wars animation, they're trying to actually not look like that, which is surprising because it's all owned by Disney now.
But it's nice that it has its own signature style as well. So when you see it, without even knowing what the show is or what the source is, you go, oh yeah, that's a Star Wars thing.
Remind me the studio that did Spider-Man Across the Universe. Is that Sony Animation? Yeah.
Sony, yeah.
So between Sony and between Illumination, I think is the other one that I think is really good. I watched the Super Mario Brothers movie over the last little while, and
oh yeah, nice.
I feel like Sony and Illumination are really up there. I pay more attention when I see something new coming from them than I do when I see something new coming from Pixar or Disney. I mean, it still kind of piques my interest. I still want to know what's going on. But I was absolutely fine to catch Elemental, which I haven't watched yet, on Disney Plus. I wasn't rushing to the theater, whereas you and I were trying to get to the theater to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? So like, there's a difference there. There's a shift there. Now another thing is that like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles doesn't have its own streaming channel that it's coming to, right? Like the Disney movies are going to come to Disney Plus sooner than later. And so I haven't looked to see. I think, is TMNT still in theaters?
I believe it is. Yeah, I'm not sure how much. I took a, well, I don't know if it is today. I took a peek over the weekend and it seemed to be still there, but
yeah, I'll catch that on streaming the moment it comes out. I don't know if I'm going to have time to go see it in theaters, but it's definitely on my radar. And much like the Super Mario movie, which I think showed up on Amazon Prime for me, happy to sit down and watch it because of the studios involved, reviews that I've heard, that kind of stuff. So sounds like it's worth a watch anyway. Moving into Ahsoka, I'm going to start off by reading the email from Zenith, a cafe community member in our Discord. Hello, Joel and Steven. I wanted to write and say that I'm loving the Ahsoka series so far. I've been caught off guard a few times by Ahsoka's imperfections, since I tend to idolize her as the quote-unquote perfect Jedi from Clone Wars and Rebels, but after I process what's happened, everything makes a lot more sense with her character and where she is mentally. I feel like the show is a bit slow sometimes, but I think primarily because I want to see more, and I look forward to being able to watch through a second time when it's finished and I fully appreciate it. I seem to fall in love with each episode several hours after watching them as I work through the initial "that's it" emotions. I also love Baylan way more than I assumed I would, and I'm quite sad that the actor, Ray Stevenson, has passed away.
Yeah.
They've done a good job of making him an interesting character. Spoiler for last week's episode. I believe this is referencing episode 4, but I've already given a decent spoiler warning. My only big criticism so far is whatever they did to de-age Hayden Christensen as young Anakin Skywalker. I feel that makeup would have looked better than digitally altering him. The world between worlds may have also been a good place to switch to animation instead, in my opinion, despite how that might have felt and how people don't watch Star Wars animation. Something about digitally altering people just feels creepy to me, but it might be something I need to get used to as technology improves. Hope you're both well and enjoying the show too. Zenith.
Nice. Thanks, Zenith.
Yeah, appreciate the email. Always good to hear from the cafe community. If you'd like to send in an email, that is thecitadelcafe@gmail.com. And I really enjoy hearing from listeners, especially when you are watching and or maybe even playing the kind of things that we are taking part in here on the show, because it just fuels the conversation. I'm going to try to do a little bit better in the Discord and letting people know ahead of time. So if you're part of the community and you are in the Discord, then you'll get a heads up, as to what I might be talking about on the show in the coming weeks. And then that way you can like either watch it, or if you've already watched it, you might be able to write in. But if you're not a member of the Discord and you want to write in anyway, just let us know what you're watching. Send us in some recommendations. Perfect time of year to do that. Winter is coming, as they say in Game of Thrones, and it's always nice to have a list of things that are recommended by like-minded nerds that are out there listening to the Citadel Cafe. So as far as the de-aging thing on Hayden Christensen, I feel like we can just we're just going to jump right in. I don't think we can really talk about this sequentially. We would be here all night. And I feel like the show is very character driven, and that's good because that means we can talk about it based on character rather than on the plot. And with the de-aging of Hayden Christensen, there's a couple times when they do it where it doesn't look the best. And it's when they're in the world between worlds, which is that blue and black kind of background where Ahsoka and Hayden are talking in this vision-like area. And it's when he's got long hair. And I don't know whether it's that they've added the hair. I don't know why they wouldn't just give him a wig, or whether they're trying to add a longer scar or make him look a specific age. But I definitely caught it. It wasn't as weird as the Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian. As epic as that was, when they finally revealed his face, it was still kind of uncanny valley, right?
Yeah.
And that I noticed. But then when they do the rest of that vision sequence this week in episode 5, so this is before, this email came in before episode 5 was out. When they do the flashbacks in this week, I felt that Hayden looked really good. And I almost don't think that it was digital. I think they just did makeup to kind of like remove a little bit of the wrinkles, because I think Hayden Christensen is roughly my age, and they're trying to portray him as like a 20-year-old in the Clone Wars, and I thought it was great. I thought he looked like a good mix of Anakin Skywalker from the prequel films that we're used to, and Anakin Skywalker from the Clone Wars, which of course was animated, but they had this nice kind of mix of like the outfit that he wore in the Clone Wars and then the outfit that he wore in the movie The Clone Wars. Like they really kind of mixed it up. And I thought that they did a good job of bringing those two things together. So I didn't mind the digital aging as much as I thought I was going to. I spotted it, but it didn't like bug me.
I guess for me personally, I felt there's a couple of points in the flashback sequence where his face seemed quite smooth. But I think you're right overall. I didn't notice it throughout the entire flashback sequence. There's a couple of times I went, oh yeah, but that was, and it only popped me out of it for a brief second. But overall, I think I agree with you. I think the world between worlds, or you're not quite dead yet realm. Yeah, it was more noticeable there. Although I do like the I don't know if they aged him more digitally or they just didn't de-age him as much when his lightsaber turned red in the ladder fight sequence. Then he had like bags under his eyes and he looked more worn. And so I thought that, you know, the differentiation between him at the beginning when he says, you know, choose to live or die kind of thing, and he had a blue lightsaber versus when he kind of came at her again at the end with a red lightsaber. I thought that was kind of a nice change. And I couldn't tell if that was digital or not.
I don't think it was digital, and I think there might have been some eye coloring digital because he has like yellowy kind of Sith eyes. But this brings up a really interesting question, is that you haven't seen episode 3.
Correct.
And you also, I believe, haven't watched Rebels.
Correct.
Have you watched much of the Clone Wars, if any?
No, not yet. It's been on my radar, but it's just the work's been just busier than usual and just life, and it's been hard to get to. And
that's good though, because it means that unlike me, who's watched all that stuff and has all of this knowledge from watching it, granted I only watched them one time through, but no, I've seen episode 3 a number of times, but the cartoons I've only watched one time through. It's a different way of watching the series. If your information on Ahsoka really only comes from her showing up in The Mandalorian as Rosario Dawson, right? Showing up in the Book of Boba Fett, you know, when she's talking with Luke and stuff and Grogu, like that kind of stuff it's an interesting kind of jumping off point. So for you, you know, coming to the Ahsoka series, what are your impressions of like the character Ahsoka and the things that are happening with only the knowledge that you're bringing to the table?
I think that I found her character really interesting. I thought it was, as you said, I only know her from when she showed up in The Mandalorian, and she was just this cool, badass, mysterious character that just showed up out of nowhere, and she's got this look to her. She just kind of has this stoic look to her. You don't know whether she's, you know, a bad guy at first or not, and then you see the lightsaber colors. And I'm not, you know, I'm not as big of a Star Wars super fan as a lot of people. So like I'm not fully up on lightsaber colors because in episode 1 and 2, a lot of the Jedi had different color swords, so I wasn't sure, like, do all Sith and all bad guy have red, and that's it? So when her lightsabers first lit up, I was still going, okay, I don't know, don't know which side she's on, but she was I mean, I like Rosario Dawson and basically everything. So when I saw that it was her and looking pretty badass, I was really excited to see what her character was going to be about. So yeah, no, like that was my introduction, and I haven't been disappointed by her performance or anything, or her portrayal of the character so far.
I think they're doing a really decent job of giving enough information for people like you to be really into the show and invested in the character of Ahsoka, even if they hadn't seen much. But chances are, if you're watching Ahsoka, the Star Wars series, you're probably familiar with The Mandalorian, because I think that's probably how people got into Star Wars TV, is like Grogu, Baby Yoda phenomenon.
Yeah,
everybody's
Yoda,
into
yeah.
Mandalorian. And now they're like, I'm going to watch all the new Star Wars TV shows when they come out. But when they introduce, in other shows, there's little Easter eggs about the Clone Wars, but like they mention the Clone Wars, there might be a helmet on the wall, that kind of stuff. But then they've started dropping these bigger hints. So like Zeb, who was the big purple, I think he says Zabrak is the name of his race. He was in The Mandalorian last season at the bar.
Right.
He's from Rebels, right? So then all of a sudden you start to realize they're bringing characters from the cartoons, and now they're bringing all the characters from Rebels. Like, gosh, there's Harrison Dula, you've got Sabine Wren, you've got even David Tennant reprises his role as Huyang. Like there's...
Oh, he was the voice in the cartoon as well?
And they're doing it... I mean, Dave Filoni is doing it very, very well and very, very right. It really helps that Filoni was very involved in all the Clone Wars stuff. So then translating these things to live action, you can get away with it. Like, they've managed to make Purrgil a real thing in Star Wars, which are the space whales that travel through hyperspace. Like, if you write that down on a piece of paper, it sounds real dumb. And anybody that's a Star Wars fan from the 80s is going to be like, that sounds really dumb. Space whales, really?
Yeah.
But, you handle it the way that the Filoni has handled it, gradually introducing them in the cartoons, bringing them in as something that's a key plot point. And then the way that they handle it in live action effects, where these things are absolutely massive and have this part to play in ancient, like really old, like older than the Jedi kind of science and intergalactic travel, like just really, really interesting stuff. And it sounds really hokey, but they've managed to pull it off. And I think it's because they don't hold your hand. They don't, like, there's a moment in one of the more recent episodes, I think it was this one, where Jason Syndulla, Hera's son, says, oh yeah, you've told me stories about the Purrgil. That's what saved Ezra and took the bad guys away. And like, that is a one sentence plot line to like the final season of Rebels. Like, there's a lot more to it than that, but you're giving the people that didn't watch Rebels enough to be like, okay, this isn't the reason why they're not freaking out about these whales, is because it's not the first time they've seen them. Right. And they're not taking an entire, paragraph of dialogue to explain that to you. It's like the moment when Huyang tells Carson Jason Syndulla's dad was a Jedi, and so he's got powers. And Carson's like, oh, cool. And then that's it. They just kind of move on. But
all right, let's follow the lead.
All the Rebels fans knew that, but people like you need to know that.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that they just throw in these little lines for humor. They don't bring the plot to a grinding halt. It's like the last sentence in a scene. It's done very, very well, and with a lot of economy. And because they don't bash you over the head with it, I think it's really, really working.
You know all of those details better than I do, but like even when I was trying to do a bit of research on the show, just leading up to, like, I always try to look up a little bit more before we do the recording, and I wish I could remember the source of it, and maybe it was it might have been an IMDb trivia point or something, but just even the writing where when they were in the forest and they needed to shut down the ship so they couldn't be spotted, this trivia piece said that, Ahsoka made sure to say, we're going to have to shut Huyang off as well, so that there was no trace of anything electronic going on, which apparently was a throwback to the Clone War or the animated series when Anakin forgot to turn off the medical droid, which then allowed them to be found or something like that. So basically, it was just almost like a just a one-liner mini throwback to it was either the animated series or it might have been one of like episode 2 or 3 or something like that. But it was basically something Anakin forgot to do that Ahsoka made sure that she did this time around.
I'm excited for you to finally catch up and watch episode 3, because then you can go through. You wouldn't have to go and watch like the Clone Wars, but there's all these great animated shorts like the Tales of the Jedi now that are just like addressing these characters like Dooku. There's the Kenobi series, like there's all that stuff, and they're just kind of like fleshing out these characters. But some of them, like, you kind of need to know where they are in the timeline for you to really appreciate kind of like what's happening. I'm actually looking forward to reading some of the books. The new Thrawn book is apparently very good, and there's an Ahsoka novel that's out now that apparently is getting good reviews. So my reading this winter, nice. I think I'm going to get back into some Star Wars stuff. But I, like you, very much appreciate Rosario Dawson's portrayal as Ahsoka. Yeah. She's an older Ahsoka. The character would be in her 40s, where the character in the Clone Wars starts off as 14, and I think the Clone Wars ends when she's around 17 or 18. She's not like super old at that point. And so there's been enough time now where she's in her 40s. And Dawson brings these like wry smiles that still hints at like how cunning she is and the whimsy of a younger Ahsoka. Like when stuff went her way in the cartoons, she was pretty happy about it. Yeah. Jedi can be a little overconfident sometimes. And you definitely get that from Rosario Dawson's portrayal of Ahsoka. She's very somber and very serious when she's dealing with Sabine Wren. But then when she talks to the Purgle at the end of this last episode, like she's all smiles, like she's like, this is cool. I can do this. Like I can't believe that this idea worked. Like she gets excited about like, let's just find out. Hope this works. Like that kind of stuff. And those are the kind of things that Ahsoka was learning in the Clone Wars from Anakin, because Anakin was so powerful and so strong in the Force that a lot of what he did just looked like luck. Right. And so she picked up that. She kind of picked up that if you stick to the rules, you may ultimately fail. But if you kind of make the rules up as you go along, stay in tune with the Force, then you could be triumphant. And in that way, and in that arrogance, she kind of got that from Anakin. And it's a really subtle way that they bring it into the show. And yeah, like if you watch it, if you rewatch any of these episodes, and actually what I would recommend for people at home, instead of rewatching the show by yourself at home alone, go to the YouTube channel Blind Wave Star Wars for Wave Squadron. It's their exclusive Star Wars reaction channel, and they'll play most of the episode at the bottom of the screen and react to key moments. So one, you don't have to invest the entire time to go watch the whole show again, but then you get all these commentary bits and reactions from people watching it for the first time. It's way more fun. Then they have all this insight into all of this content that they've watched, and they can bring that to the table when they talk about the show. In specific situations like episode 5, which was just this past week, it's an epic reaction. Like last week and this week, like a couple of guys couldn't stay in their chairs. They were so excited about what was going on. They're younger than you and I. I think they grew up watching Clone Wars. So like they are prime targets for Dave Filoni pulling on the heartstrings, right? Like these guys are tearing up. I really like watching them, but it also brings in a lot of information that even I maybe don't have, because they've read books and they play video games that are all Star Wars, and they have all this kind of like input. But they brought up something really interesting about how Dave Filoni really understands Star Wars in that he writes and presents certain things, certain concepts as up for interpretation. So there's no right or wrong. There's going to be people that are arguing on the internet because it's Star Wars and it's Star Wars fans, but ultimately it's up to you. And I think that's really important because he doesn't explain away the mysticism of the Force, which is even something George Lucas is guilty of, because I don't know anybody that thinks midichlorians was a good idea, right? Everybody much prefers space wizards, like the magic, leave it at that. And I think that he's kind of bringing that back in with the World Between Worlds. So you don't really know much about the World Between Worlds at all, right? Like that's kind of a new concept. So in Rebels, and this is not a giant spoiler, I'll keep this pretty loose. Ezra Bridger, who is mentioned in this show, that's who they're going to go find, is a Force-sensitive individual, is being trained by Kaelin Jarrus, who is Jason Syndulla's dad.
Okay.
And he is very Force-sensitive in unique ways. Leave it at that. And he gets access to the world between worlds. And so we've seen it before. And we've had it explained to us before. And there's very few Jedi, usually masters, who get access to this. So Ezra Bridger being able to access it as a young man is really unusual, and kind of like pushes him as like the star of the show and stuff like that. Anyway, it's this space where Jedi can communicate with each other. So in terms of what you're used to in the Jedi Star Wars universe, think about it when Ben Kenobi appears to Luke Skywalker as a Force ghost.
Right.
It's that kind of a thing, except it's not time sensitive. So that's why, or one of the reasons why, Anakin Skywalker, as he appears to Ahsoka in The World Between Worlds, is 25-year-old Anakin Skywalker. Because at this point in the Star Wars timeline, we know that Ahsoka has met Luke Skywalker, who, like, Darth Vader died on the Death Star. This is all pre-Mandalorian. Like, Anakin Skywalker is dead in Ahsoka's real world. So to be able to see young Anakin, it kind of has this weird push and pull. And that's what I mean about it leaving it open to interpretation. Is it a vision of Anakin Skywalker? Is it just Ahsoka remembering Anakin Skywalker in her memory? Right? Or is it Anakin Skywalker projecting his self into the Force at the time when he was still alive, seeing into the future where Ahsoka needs him? Like, there's no one, you can't say for sure. You can look at all the different things that happen, the different bits of dialogue, and arrive at your own conclusion. And that is the beauty of this show right now, is that it's not smacking you in the face with, this is how this has to be. This is now more mystical and up for interpretation. And I really, really like that. And there's a couple of things that they say, like, as an example, there's the fight where in the flashback, Ahsoka is battling in the Siege of Mandalore, which we're familiar with only in passing because we've talked about it in the Mandalorian show. And Ahsoka was there during the Siege of Mandalore, and Anakin walks into the vision and says, I don't remember this battle. And Ahsoka can say, well, that's because we have parted ways at this point. You weren't here. You weren't my master at this point. She wasn't even part of the Jedi at that point in the cartoon. And so you get that, well, that's kind of strange. Like, if Anakin in this is supposed to be in her mind, why would he walk in and say, I don't remember this? Right? So, like, that's a strange thing. And then at the end of that fight, as you mentioned, when he's got a red lightsaber and they're fighting, and she says, I don't want to fight you. He says, I've heard that before. You want to know who said that? Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, right?
Yeah.
So, like, those are the kind of lines that Dave Filoni throws in there where, like, you're sitting there snapping and whistling at the screen, like, I know that reference. Like, I got that, Dave. And it's very, very well done. But it leaves it up to you. Like, it kind of like, are those the two bits that kind of make you think, oh, maybe it is Anakin? And then, he disappears as fast as he arrives. And if you want a really good feel-good time, look up a bunch of reaction videos to the first appearance of Anakin in this show, which is the first time that Ahsoka and Anakin have been on screen together since the Clone Wars, when they separated back in, when that series ended. There are a lot of people losing their ever-loving Star Wars minds in a very positive way. I want to talk about Ray Stevenson as Baylan Skoll. And this is new to me. I've never heard of him. You would know as much about him as I do. It is such a shame that he passed away, as Zenith brought up in the email, because I really like him as an actor. Actually, he was in Thor. He was in Rome. He's been in a bunch of stuff. And I really like him as Baylan Skoll. He brings a lot of layers to the villain, a lot of reverence. Like, he's a villain. He's a fallen Jedi, and he's changed his ways, but he's not an animal. Like he's not Darth Maul, right? Like he's not a choppy hitman. You know, he's still got some honor among thieves, so to speak. And, you know, when he spares Sabine Wren because he said he would, because she gave him the map, there's a lot to him that I like. And he's also menacing as all hell. The the lightsaber battle between Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll was just fantastic. Like he's just two-handed Claymore style medieval, you know, heavy blows, and very intentional. Even though that sequence felt like it was shot slower, he moves slower in some ways, but swings faster in others. It's really bizarre in a good way. It's really not what you normally see from lightsaber battles, which I think is interesting.
Well, he has such like a presence on screen. It was just, and to go to, I guess, add on to what you're saying about his fight sequence, he basically, in my mind, was just, if I remember correctly, it's like his body was just moving straight forward, and his arms were swinging like you said, double-handed, swinging the lightsaber around for the fight. But he didn't really stop moving forward. He's just like this.
Yes.
He's like this tank going forward, and just like, I'm coming at you, and my lightsaber is going to block anything your lightsaber is doing, and I'm just going to continue to move forwards.
Yeah, very aggressive. It's funny how he appears to move slowly, but you're right. Like he's always gaining ground. He's always taking something from the opponent. Even if he's blocking, he's still stepping forward. You know, like it's very good in that way. And I thought it was interesting too. And there are people that are out there that are much bigger lightsaber nerds than I am, where they would notice the different forms that he was taking. And one of them is a form that was favored by Qui-Gon Jinn. And I don't know if Qui-Gon was his master at some point. I can't remember. They dropped a lot of information in the first couple of shows that I don't really remember. There was a lot of Hugh Yang talking about, like, I've only ever, because Hugh Yang sees the lightsabers, they analyze the lightsaber designs, and Hugh Yang says, I don't recognize the lightsaber from this other one, which is Shin Hati, that's the apprentice of Skoll. But he recognizes Baylan Skoll's lightsaber because he's only ever seen one of them in his entire, you know, career as a lightsaber, you know, designer in the Jedi Temple.
Right.
And so it was able to identify Baylan Skoll, and that makes him really interesting because it means he used to be a Jedi. He's not just some force wielding Sith person. Like he's used to be a Jedi, somehow managed to escape Order 66, and has like adopted, like, so has knowledge. Like you think about a Sith being this crazy lightsaber wielding, you know, force villain. But then if you think about a fallen Jedi, like there's somebody that's trained in all the different lightsaber forms that all the Jedis use and knows them, and now is fighting against them with, you know, that knowledge. Like he's regal and terrifying at the same time. And it works out very, very well for him. Stevenson used to stand 6'3". And so that's a big person. Jeez. I don't know how tall Rosario Dawson is, but she's not 6 feet tall. I want to say she's probably about average, maybe 5'5". But yeah, it's one of those things where the two of them on screen together is magic. And even Ahsoka does some cool moves where she kind of like props herself up with a foot behind her against a stone, and that's like a signature Ahsoka move from the cartoons. And there's a really cool interview with Rosario Dawson from the Star Wars days in London earlier this year, where they asked her about the training, and she would watch the cartoons and really, it's like, I want to do that. And she'd take the sequence to their sword master, and the sword master were like, that's impossible. That's a cartoon. We can't do that. But we can do this, you know? And so like, there's the like spins and flips and these like weird stretches. And the sword master's like, no, that's a cartoon. We can't do that. But let's try to do something similar or whatever. And I thought that was really, really, really neat. I can't say I'm really taken by Shin Hati, the apprentice. She's very one note. I don't necessarily think that's, you know, Ivana Sankno's fault. Like I think that the writing for her is just basically do as master says, look grumpy. That's kind of her direction that she's been given. I hope that they give her more.
Yeah, sometimes I like to do plot guessing just as things come together. Like, I wonder what they're going to do. And I find her character even though she hasn't really said a ton, I find her interesting enough in the sense that she seems like she's just, as a character, just broken enough to be potentially maybe go against her master at some point. So there's part of me that feels like once everything starts to go down at the end, that Balin might have a change of heart once he realizes what's really going to go down. And then she's going to, like, then Shin's suddenly going to be like, no, this is what we signed up for. This is what we're doing. And then she, like, maybe she takes him down. I don't know. They're just, like I said, I like to do plot guessing sometimes. And I wonder if it's going to go something like that.
She does have that myopic view, doesn't she?
Yeah. And there seems to be something like something good about Balin still in like his wisdom and his ways, like you said, honor amongst thieves kind of thing. Like I feel like it may get pushed to a point where it's like, no, this is not what I signed up for, but this is what she signed up for, kind of thing. So I don't know. I'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because it's, and it's as sad as it is, or unfortunate as it is, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out now that the actor has passed away.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know. I mean, this all happens before the sequel trilogy, and there's no mention of Balin Skull and any of that stuff. So, but there also wasn't any mention of Ahsoka Tano, and she met Luke Skywalker. So, it's a big galaxy. So there's room, I think, for some of these tales to just like have fuzzy endings, especially now that we know that there's another galaxy that is impossible to travel to unless you know where it is, have a giant hyperspace ring, which is very cool, by the way, or know how to ride a whale. Like there's only a couple ways to get there.
I love how those are the two options. You know how to build this massive warp ring, or you're buddy with whales. And
that's where I like the epic Star Warsy stuff that they're doing. Like that giant hyperspace ring is incredible, and it's not another Death Star. Like it feels imperial. It has that kind of grandeur. It has that kind of overkill. Morgan Elsbeth is creepy, but not like old and scraggly like an emperor. Like she's one of the Night Sisters, and that's all Clone Wars cartoon stuff. Like there's a lot that I think that they're doing to make that kind of like weird cartoony stuff palatable as a live action. And by bringing in the giant hyperspace ring, like it brings in the kind of grandeur from the movies, but it doesn't like just copy the same idea over and over again.
Yeah.
Like I think that kind of stuff. Seeing the Ghost, the ship in live action, is fantastic. Although I noticed this past episode, in episode 5, that there's no color on it. I'm pretty sure that in the cartoons it had like yellow paint and green spots on it. Now, granted, there's been a lot of years and an entire war since then, because Rebels is set just before the events of the original 3 Star Wars movies. So the Ghost would have been in all that, and sure, I guess it could have been retrofitted with other stuff, but like it's a little bit too bad that it doesn't have some telltale signs. For example, Ahsoka's Jedi starship is got that maroon and gray kind of coloring to it, so it stands out. The Ghost stood out like that in the cartoons. It had some coloring on it, and I'm a little bit surprised that with all the close-ups that we've had, it's not looked like that. It's still cool that it's there, though. It's still cool to have it. It's still cool to have Chopper in live action. He got a little annoying in the cartoons, but that's because the cartoons he was part of the cartoons that was often written for kids.
Yeah.
But in the show, he's a great comic relief, just like a grumpy R2-D2. Like there's a sequence when Harrison Dula is putting a homing device on, I think it's Elsbeth's ships as they warp away. Or no, some people are warping away from a shipping yard, and she's trying to get Chopper to put a homing beacon on it, and he can't find it. And he's like, did you go through my stuff? And she's like, no, I didn't go through your stuff. Like that's the kind of attitude that he has. And it's really fun when they add stuff like that in. I really like the lightsaber fights, like I mentioned, between Ahsoka and Skull, but also between Sabine and Shin. I thought that was a really interesting fight too, because then you've got another Mandalorian. There's a really fun moment when Sabine puts her hand out and tried to do a force push, but it didn't really work because Sabine can't really get in touch with the force. And Shin is like, you have no power. And then Sabine cocks her wrist and shoots her with a wrist rocket. I was just like, this is perfect. So Mandalorian, like just deflect and distract and then shoot somebody in the face with a wrist rocket. Like, just, it's classic Star Wars stuff. All that I think has been really good. And I think the only thing that I would say for me right now is a bit of a negative is some of the plot stuff has been very slow. Episode 3 was short and really didn't move anything forward. We had a great space battle. There was that fight with, Sabine and Ahsoka in the ship and all the starfighters protecting a planet. Like, it was a cool sequence, but like there was no real plot movement in that 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that felt a little bit slow. And I'm on the fence on whether the show is shot slow, if the dialogue is a little bit clunky. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like it's a slow show?
I feel like it's a slow show, but I sort of like it in that way, the same way I liked The Mandalorian for it. It's like, it seems that it's so rare that there are shows that take their time and just allow the characters to just sit and not be like, what's going next? What's going next? Let's move on to the next thing. Let's have like 1,000 miles per hour dialogue going on just to fill the empty spaces. You don't have to have nonstop banter just as you walk from one space to another, just because, you want to fill that empty time or whatever. So there's something about it that I do appreciate. And I like Ahsoka more than The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian, it seemed the pacing was slow, which was interesting. And it made everything seem that much more intentional. But then every episode was like the same sort of structure. Like, it would be like almost for the first season anyway, almost, he meets someone else. He goes on this side quest with this baby Yoda, and it's wrapped up. Then he gets in his ship and he goes on to the next thing. So it was like I'm the only one who's still watching The Mandalorian. The rest of my family was like, it kind of was just the same thing every week. And so they stopped watching after season 1. But the thing that I liked about this, it seems to be still taking the time, allowing, these slow intentional moments, but the story feels like it's been progressing forward throughout the entire season. There's been no one-off episodes so far. So I'm enjoying it.
The only, I think, asterisk there is just episode 3. Everything else, like you said, has been this. Yeah. It's like a march, and like a game of chess, I feel like they are moving pieces slowly into pace, and I think it's going to become a little bit faster now that I'm assuming we're going to see Thrawn finally, and in the last 3 episodes, because it's a mini series and it's only 8 episodes. I don't believe it's set up for more than one season. I think we'll see more of Ahsoka.
I don't think so.
But I don't think we're going to see her in this series. I think Ahsoka will show up in another season of The Mandalorian, or, some other series that Star Wars is doing, right?
Or that culmination movie they're supposed to do once everything wraps up.
That I think we'll see for sure. Because, I don't see them wrapping this up in any way, shape, or form in the next 3 episodes in terms of the big things, like Thrawn, all that kind of stuff. I can see them wrapping up Ahsoka's part in it, maybe, but and maybe something like Baylan Skull, but I don't see them wrapping up the big plot devices are not being wrapped up. If anything, they're being set up in this series, which I'm all for. I'm fine with Thrawn being the next big bad rather than the Emperor coming back from the dead. I much prefer something new, which I think will be very, very cool. Much like the way that the lightsaber fights are shot slower, I guess I should say. To me, it reminds me of samurai movies. It's a lot of standoff. It's a lot of, I move my foot 3 inches to the left. You counter by moving your foot 2 inches backwards. Like that kind of stuff. And I feel like if you take that idea and you apply it to how the show is shot and how some of the dialogue is delivered, then it's a little easier to take.
Yes.
And like you said, I think we are unfortunately conditioned to mile a minute the way that most stuff is shot these days, specifically film, but also action TV is pretty bad. But it's so fast. It's so high octane. It's really hard to see what's going on. It's hard to track sometimes. And because the show is not that, I don't know that it's slow. It just might be normal pace, but we've just gotten so used to the splatter gun way that so many new things are shown to us that we're feeling that it's slow, even though it's just not. But I'm, like I said, I'm liking most of it. there are some wooden dialogue moments where like there's these really long pauses, and I kind of wonder like maybe it's the fact that the other actor just wasn't there. Like maybe we're looking at a different shot from a different time. Like we have to get Hera back to say these lines to Jason Sandula, but Jason Sandula is in school, so we're just going to get her to say those lines and we'll put Jason in later. And there's this weird pause sometimes between mother and son talking where it's like, I've not ever witnessed two people standing in the same place talking that slowly to one another. It's weird.
Yeah.
And I don't want to lay anything at the feet of Mary Elizabeth Winstead because she's a good actor, and I think that she's doing well with Hera. I think it's just the writing. I think it's just the lines that they give her are a little bit awkward. It might be the situations from like I said, an acting tennis match where the people she's talking to may not be in the same scene physically when they were filming it, that kind of stuff. But I like most of it. I do find her eyes very distracting, which is weird because Rosario Dawson is wearing blue contact lenses for Ahsoka. And I notice them from time to time, but I don't find them as distracting as the very unnatural looking green eyes that Hera Syndulla has. And I can appreciate that, as we get into these shows, comics and cartoons and stuff, characters have certain eyes and it makes sense to do them. It's like Henry Cavill in The Witcher. He has to have these yellow eyes when he goes into battle mode, like that kind of stuff. But honestly, I wouldn't be upset if they just said, you know what, Hera for live action is not going to have blazing green Twi'lek eyes. She's going to have brown eyes because that's what color, Winstead's eyes are. And she's got very pretty eyes. So just let her act with those. And I'm just wondering if some of what Winstead is capable of is being lost under all the prosthetics. And I think that the decision to give her the green eyes is like, well, we have to do it this way because this is the way that the fans want it. I'm just like, I feel like, at least for my part as a fan, I wouldn't care. I would much rather, the actor be comfortable and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, by the way, tip of the hat to anybody in this show, specifically Rosario Dawson and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who have to go through probably hours of prosthetic makeup to get into that and act through it. Like it's can't be easy. But Ahsoka Tano's getup looks phenomenal. Like I really don't question it in the slightest. I forget half the time that it's Rosario Dawson. Every once in a while the light hits her and it obviously still looks like her, but most of the time you're very much thinking that it's Ahsoka. Any final thoughts before we wrap up on Ahsoka?
Not really criticism on Ahsoka per se, but it's just like, I guess overall enjoying it. I guess I don't know if it's a beef or whatever, but just sometimes I feel like the main characters in Star Wars shows sometimes, like I like the pacing, but all of the main characters seem to be so stoic on some level. Almost like they feel like they need to deliver, like drop a line of wisdom every time they speak kind of thing. And I think it's probably just because as I know not the Mandalorian's not a Jedi, but as the Jedis become the master with a pupil, they all seem to get to this like, well, now I have to use my master talking to my pupil voice, and I'm going to be slightly cryptic because guess what? There's a lesson in there that you've got to figure out for yourself, kind of thing. And after a while, I'm like, just let one of them be fun and sarcastic. Every once in a while, I get that feeling, just like, but even like Mandalorian, his delivery, and like Boba Fett and how they speak, it's always like with this. I've been through a lot, so I'm going to talk with this edge of wisdom in my voice kind of thing now. And it's, not a big criticism, but every once in a while I'm like, all right, kind of show everyone that you know how to emote.
In The Mandalorian, it's an homage to Westerns having very little dialogue, the strong silent type sort of deal.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. And in that, I think you would really enjoy the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin in the Clone Wars because they can't do that for 7 seasons. Like it would drive everybody nuts and kids wouldn't watch it. And so Anakin and Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars have to adapt to changing situations constantly. So there's not a lot of time to be stoic, right? And the one excuse I'll give it for this show is that Ahsoka is still dealing with a lot. And that's what I think her vision this past week was about, was she left her training and she's got this legacy of death that Baylan Skoll brought up, and that her master ended up being Darth Vader. So she doesn't want to take the chance of passing on what she's learned to a new pupil. She didn't want to train Grogu. She, doesn't want to train Sabine. She walked away from that because of the fear of failing and passing on things that she shouldn't pass on or is scared to pass on. And the lesson, I think, in her vision, her encounter with Anakin in the World Between Worlds, is that she has to get over this if she's going to move forward. And I think there's a big light shift, quite literally. They dress her in a lot of white after she comes out of the water, and she's more smiley. She's more goofy. She's, knocks on the canopy of the spaceship saying like, Hu Yang, go in there. Like it's a lot more vibrant. And I think that she had this weight and stress on her shoulders. I think, unfortunately, that's the kind of thing where Clone Wars and Rebels fans are going to get it right away. And then people like you coming to it a lot greener are just like, I don't know why they're so stoic all the time. Luke Skywalker was like that in Return of the Jedi. He talked very calm, and it was an acting choice from Hamill. They unfortunately pulled that forward into the appearance of like de-aged Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian. But I think a lot of that had to do with, we can't have him speak quickly because the technology just can't keep up.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it would work. I think it would fall apart technically. And that's why he had to speak so slowly. But I agree with you. I think that it feels broken and disjointed, and it feels like they speak in this very kind of condescending calm, and you're just like, this.
That's a good way to put it.
The situation doesn't, because then you've got, like, on the flip side of that, you've got not Sabine Wren, you've got the other characters in The Mandalorian, like, talking back and forth to one another in a very serious situation where they're all trapped in a room, and that dialogue pacing is much different. And then Luke Skywalker comes in and starts speaking in very slow, complete sentences with long pauses, and it's just like, it feels very strange. And I can see that happening here too. Like even Sabine talks a lot faster and acts different than Ahsoka. And in a way, they could be doing that on purpose to contrast, right? The yin yang of their relationship is like, Ahsoka is the calm, I'm trying to weigh every situation so I don't make any mistakes. And Sabine is more like, I'm really impatient. I just want to get shit done. And it's a push and pull that they have.
Yeah, I guess it's partially because like in the original 3 movies, you did have the stoic characters like Yoda, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like Darth Vader. But then you had like, it was balanced against 3POs.
Chitter chatter.
Master Luke. And then you'd have also like Han Solo, and he was just like sarcastic all over the place. Like you had characters that seemed to not fall into those roles as well, that were like almost the complete opposite, that kind of balanced it out. And and maybe it's just that, like you said, I'm coming to a greener, but it feels like the characters that balance it out haven't been there as much in the TV shows.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that the cast of characters has to be a little bit smaller, and I also wonder if they're kind of consciously trying to make sure they don't copy the movies. Like they want to try to do something new. In that way.
Enough.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It can feel a little bit monotone in that way.
But again, this is just me being nitpicky. Like overall, thoroughly enjoying this. Like I can find very few flaws with this in a show that and I'm really enjoying it. Like I'm just, again, if I had to pick at some things, those would be the things I picked at.
I'm the same way. I have little things like that, but I'm very curious to see where it's going to go. I'm obviously going to be watching the moment that it comes out. Actually, I forgot to watch it last night. I got tired and went to bed, forgetting that it came out at 10 o'clock.
Same here.
And then I got up this morning and I was watching, like checking the news on social media and checking the weather. And then there was like an Ahsoka thing that scrolled by and I was like, oh crap. Thankfully it wasn't a spoiler, but I was just like, oh, I have to watch that right now before I do any internet. So I made breakfast and I watched it over breakfast because like I can't be on the internet today without knowing what happened, especially after this cliffhanger from last week. So yeah. It's going to be fun to watch the rest of it. And I'm sure there will be more commentary on it on this show as we finish up. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions as to where it's going and what's happening next. So should be a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Moving into the Internet Minute, which is, of course, brought to you by you, dear listener. The Citadel Cafe is 100% listener supported. If you're getting value out of the show, please consider putting a little bit of value back in. You can become a member at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Joining at any level will get you an invite to the member-only Discord server, which is shared with my personal Discord, and access to Barista Cut bonus audio sessions. Special thanks to Bean Counter patrons Cosmic and Smurf588. Thank you ever so much for your support of this episode. Patron count is at 29. That's down 2 from August, so there's always room for more. Our goal each time we record is to have at least one more patron than the previous episode. If you would like to be patron number 30, visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. My pick this week is short and sweet, and thanks to Alastair McFly, who sent this to me moments before I sat down to record. This is the Behind the Brick YouTube short tour of the Duck Bricks Lego collection. It's about 90 seconds. It's just a little YouTube short. However, it did lead me to the Duck Bricks YouTube channel and a massive Lego collection tour that's 90 minutes long on their YouTube channel. So I'll have links to all of this in the show notes, and it'll be very easy for you to find on YouTube and watch. I've not watched the 90-minute one. I just watched the 90-second tour, and I think it's 8,000 sets that are in this collection room.
I believe that's what he said.
It is bananas. There's 2 or 3 Millennium Falcons on the wall. There's all kinds of Ninjago dragons like hung from the ceiling. It's wild, and it's a lot to take in. It's more about just the vastness of the collection rather than like honing in on anything specific. But I'm very curious to see a little bit more. I'm probably going to throw on that collection tour from the creator of this collection at some point in the background, maybe when I'm doing dishes or something, and just check it out. But it's wild.
Yeah. Hope it's insured.
Oh, I would hope so. Man, you'd have to, right? Because I mean, that's also just like the cost, like the sheer monetary value of some of those being collectibles and worth way more than they would have been paid for,
I wonder if something like that would be like worth more than the house itself. And I was going to say it partially as a joke, but then I just went, hold on a sec. I mean, I don't have the math, a brain quick enough to do the math right now, but there are thousands. And I just caught the clip of it too, and thousands of minifigures, over 8,000 completely built sets in and around hanging on the walls and stuff. Like that's got to be...
It's got to be it's well into 5 figures for sure.
Oh yeah.
But like with housing prices these days, I don't know if it's $500,000. It depends on the house, I guess.
I'll go with you could buy a car with it.
More than a car. Definitely, you could definitely get yourself a car for that. But like, I would rather have the Lego, to be honest. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Citadel Cafe. You can get more information about the show and links to some of the things that Stephen and I talked about tonight at thecitadelcafe.com. Music for the show was composed by Kevin MacLeod. You can email us at thecitadelcafe@gmail.com, just like Zenith, and find the show by name on social media. Subscribe for free on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and even YouTube. Please leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcast app. That is a great way for new listeners to find the show. You can also just tell people that you've enjoyed listening, where they can go to find it. It's always a great way to grow the listener base. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything that I am doing online at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to my other podcast about Minecraft at thespawnchunks.com. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream at least 3 days a week, Lego on Fridays, Minecraft on the weekends, and lately a fair bit of Starfield, which I do plan on continuing from here on out. You can find Stephen at StephenESC on social media and Twitch. You've been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap, but you can only pick 2.